gods. Who are they? What are they? And is it possible that these beings, whose origins are from ancient times, are the unseen catalysts of modern culture? Is it possible that these gods lie behind the most pivotal events, forces, and movements taking place in our nation and around the world at this very moment? Is it possible that what we in the modern world take as nothing more than ancient mythology could actually possess a reality beyond our fathoming? Who is the possessor? The enchanter? The destroyer? And the sorceress? Could a sign that has appeared all over America and the world be linked to the gods of Mesopotamia? And if so, what does it actually mean? Is it possible that the gods are even affecting your life right now? How can you recognize it? And what can you do about it?
Here we are, week 5 after talk. Man, this thing's really caught some traction.
We're almost over.
I think we can do some more. But every week we've been able to dialogue about what you've presented and talked about with this idea of Return of the Gods. Again, giving Jonathan Kahn credit and giving you, thankful for you dialing in on this. We've talked about a lot of these gods, ancient gods that have kind of resurfaced, and they through history have resurfaced. We've talked about Bale, Ishtar, Molech, and now we're back kind of to Ishtar. We're going to talk about the transformer today. Can you give us some of that as we go into this conversation?
It is a progression in how this takes place with the worship of Bale, the key deity, quote unquote, of the Old Testament outside of God. You see Bale worship over and over. You'll see it in ancient cultures over and over, which is kind of the king of the gods, and that offered success and prosperity, and that you had to appease Bale. Then you get to Ishtar, who took off the constraints of sexuality, the god of sex, of love. Then from that, Molech, the god of human sacrifice, specifically children, that were the product then of what was happening with Ishtar. And just unbelievable. Then we get to the transformer, which is really Ishtar, another example of what Ishtar does. So we're going to pick up where we left off with that sexual immorality that we talked about in the, I think in the third session that we did. And I encourage folks, go back and listen to these, because if you pick up right now, you'll understand some things. But if you'll go back and put this thing in the sequence of the order that it's happening, then it really will make a whole lot of sense, because it is a progression that is happening. And what we talked about with the transformer is what we have seen really come into play in the last 10 years, the last 5 years specifically. We see the rise of Bale in our American culture probably in the 50s and the 60s. Ishtar, especially in the 60s with the sexual revolution, the feminism and all that took place there. But what we have seen in these last 10 to 5 years really now is something we never thought we would see. But yet we are seeing that, where Ishtar is focusing then on transformation of individuals.
Yeah, you said some interesting things in this conversation of how Ishtar's goal is to transform the identity of a man and the identity of a woman. That sounds so far-fetched, but it's not.
Well, let me back you away from that. It's not. That's not the goal. That's the means to the goal. The goal is the destruction of society, which is then the destruction of mankind. It's chaos. The devil brings chaos, brings destruction, brings anarchy. That's what the devil does. Kill, steal, and destroy. That's the end result. So Ishtar is the god of sexuality. So how can I then use my area of expertise to bring about the end destruction of society? Bale does it through, again, the love of money, the desire for wealth and for fortune and fame, pride and arrogance, which brings about destruction. Pride comes before a fall. Molech then is targeted at our children, to the point that we have so removed ourselves from humanity that life is no longer sacred to us, and the effects that that has upon a society. Ishtar, again, says, all right, how can I bring about the destruction of society? Well, one of the basic foundations of society is the roles of men and women, their identity.
Yeah.
So that I'm going to remove their sexual identity. I'm going to blur it. I'm going to make it where, no, you're not a man, you're a woman. You're not a woman, you're a man. You can be both. And once you take away those roles of man, woman, husband, wife, father, mother, you'll see the destruction of our society, because those are the foundations of our society. We've seen that in parts of our community where the family structure has literally been destroyed. And we see the chaos that's in those areas. And it's not one part of our community, it's our entire community. And I think this of blurring identities, sexual identities, gender fluid now is the whole thing. No, gender is an identity. You are or you're not. And this, again, is what Ishtar is doing. So that's the end result. It's not about sex. Sex is the means by which she's doing this.
It's crazy. We said something in our after talk last week, that we're in a spot that we thought that we wouldn't be in 10 years ago. And I think I interjected to say, no, it's more like 15 years ago. And when you look back to history, I mean, our current history of where you were at, what we were doing 15 years ago, these were the statements being made. No, it'll never get to that. It would never get to the things that you're about to list. But here we are, 15, 16 years later, and we're sitting right at the door of the things we never thought would come. How did we get here?
Well, it's progression. It's the little foxes that spoil the vine. It's the little yeast that destroys the loaf. It always starts small, and if you allow it to continue, it will always grow. I ask people, how much cancer do you allow in your body? If I could tell you could have a few cells of cancer in your body, would that be acceptable to you? Well, of course not, because we know what happens with cancer. It's not dormant. It doesn't lay there. It begins to spread. And sadly, by the time it reaches the surface that you feel the symptoms or you see that, it's probably already spread throughout your body. And that's how the enemy works. He works subtly. He works behind the scenes. He works in darkness to be able to infiltrate, begin to grow. And that's why he targets children. That's why we have got to be the protector of our children. And we've turned our children over to an education system that is caught up in everything that we've been talking about. And they are the propagators of it. They are the indoctrinators of this. They promote it and they hide it from parents. Now, that's not all teachers, that's not all schools, but we are naive if we think that is not happening in the vast number of schools that are taking place. So it's a progressive. That's how we got there. We let it happen little by little. Oh, it's okay. We trusted individuals. Oh, they're the school. We can trust that teacher. We can trust that doctor. We can trust that politician. Now we know there was an agenda behind this. And sadly, we are seeing the sores begin to arise. We're feeling the symptoms of this thing, and it's going to be painful to remove it, but it can be.
So you fought a big fight against marriage early on, and they made a statement, and I think you made mention of this. They made a statement that this is just about what happens in a bedroom. But it's not, and it hasn't stopped there. And you had the insight, the foresight, the revelation to know that it wasn't going to just stop there, and it hasn't. Where has it come now?
Well, it's celebrated. If you're talking about from the point where they said, hey, what two consenting adults do in their bedroom, that's our business. Stay out of our bedroom. They brought their bedroom now onto Times Square. They brought their bedroom into my church altar. Exactly. So now they're forcing me. If you don't want to perform a gay marriage, well, then there's going to be consequences for that. If you don't enforce my choice of gender, there's consequences for that. Now, suddenly, we are the ones that are being persecuted. I always say, well, where's all the tolerance now? It's the progression that takes place with the worship of Ishtar. And I hope they go back and watch the whole teaching, because what we are seeing today of transgenderism, of transvestites, of this being in the public square, of this being accepted, is nothing. This is not new. Even people having surgery to physically alter themselves, this is not new. This is what was happening in the worship of Ishtar.
Yeah.
And now it has returned. That's why we call this the return of the gods. This isn't a sudden enlightenment. This isn't suddenly we've realized this is what we need to do. No, this is the ancient gods returning again with the same things they were doing back then.
So I think that's the eye-opening thing, is that when we look, and again, thankful for this series, is like when we look at history, we go, wait, this has happened before, and it's happened before, and there's a pattern. You use that word. There's a pattern to all of this thing. Okay, what are some of those things that are happening now that are just like the worship of Ishtar before that we're seeing in our city streets? What are some of those things?
Well, we're going to get more into that in our next session. In our next session, I'm going to give you some specifics. I mean, down to dates and times that are being duplicated from ancient culture in the celebration. What we're seeing today is the priest and priestess of Ishtar were involved in cross-dressing. The men, because Ishtar is a female entity, identified that way, but she also said, I can identify as a man. Whatever I want to be, I can be. But primarily identifying as a woman. So then the men priests would dress up as women. They would take on those attributes and dress that way. Cross-dressers, the celebrations that were taken. It's the same type of thing that we are seeing today. And again, next week, I'm promoting again. Next week, I'm going to give you specifics of how that took place and what they did that were so eye-opening out of history. We're seeing that. We're seeing as I mentioned, surgical procedures, and the fact that these are all targeted towards children. I think if there's any takeaway from this session about the Transformers, understand who the target is. They're not going to change me. I'm going to go into the men's restroom.
Yeah.
I'm a man. I know that. There's no way they're going to talk me out of that. Take that to an 8-year-old boy who is being told over and over, maybe you need to think about this. Maybe you're really not a boy. Maybe because of your artistic abilities and everything, maybe that's your feminine side, and you need to encourage that. And that's not just because of talents that you have. There's nothing wrong with people being talented. Some of the best chefs are men.
Yeah.
Best artists are men. Now I'm going to get in trouble with the female audience out there. That your talents and your abilities have nothing to do with your sexuality. Society has forced that upon this, and now the enemy is utilizing that to say, well, then maybe that's because you're really not a man, you're a woman. They're guilty more of what they say that we're guilty of
course.
And they use that against us. And our children then are the ones that are being targeted, and they're the ones that are being indoctrinated, and that's what we've got to be aware of.
And so, like, some of the other things you talked about is like this role reversal. If you're a man, you need to hold these certain utensils, and if you're a woman, you need to hold a sword, and like that was the ancient worship. And you're now pointing back into like it's going after kids. Oh no, it's not our society, our education system, but we've got a specific that it's happening to our youngest kids, that they're teaching confusion.
That's it.
They're not teaching clarity, they're teaching confusion. What is this that we've got happening in Georgia?
So this is in Georgia. This is an elementary school in Auburn, Georgia, fourth graders. So a part of the curriculum of what they're teaching there
is that 9 years old?
Is awareness. So this is according to the Post Millennium, the newspaper there. Fourth graders were shown a video of a dog puppet. Kids love puppets. Of a dog puppet who believes he is a cat and forces the other animals to affirm his identity. Okay, now what they're teaching is that you're not a boy, you could be a girl. And I've watched this video, And you've got this puppet that's the dog, and the other dog says, hey, let's go chase cars, let's go do that. Oh no, I don't want to do that. I want to play with this yarn. I want to learn how to say meow. I want to learn how to lick my paws like a cat. And so this other dog then has questions, goes to the teacher. There's a human and there's a teacher. Hey, oh no, you shouldn't question him. Who are you to tell him what he is? We need to be accepting of him because that's the way it is. Now that's to fourth graders. And that's the type of curriculum that is being taught to them. And of course, the kids just love it and they're accepting of it. Here's what they said about the people who originated this. They say somehow puppets are able to gently pry open that door and allow communications to begin. Our hope is that enough kids and their families see this so there can be dialogue, and that's the beginning of all good change. Here's the thing. They don't want families to see this first. They want the 4-year-old to see this first. They want an adult authority figure that is promoting this, indoctrinating that child, for that adult to explain it to them, to say this is what is right, this is what is wrong. We've got to be accepting of that, to embed that in that children. So when that child goes home and says, yo, Mama, we saw a show today, a puppet show, where the dog is a cat. And the mom's going to say, that's ridiculous. Dogs can't be cats. And then because of what that child learned at school, they're going to make a judgment about their parents. My parents is a hater.
Well, even let's be real. I'm your son, but we have kids and we have younger kids. Kids don't come home talking about everything at school.
No.
So they process out of their 9-year-old mind, their 6-year-old mind, without having the ability to dialogue, right? That's something of the development of the child. I don't know when I ran home to you to talk about what happened at 3rd grade, 4th grade, especially if I was getting in trouble or I had questions of lack of understanding. And so then it's just repeated pattern and process that they're being indoctrinated. We'll use that word, indoctrination.
So we taught you 4 plus 4 is 8. And the teacher taught you that and showed you to there, and so you accept that.
And you affirmed as the parent that
right. That teacher, they're teaching you that right there. H2O, that's water. That's okay. That they've got all that. So when the teacher then comes and says, "Hey, a boy can be a girl.
A dog can be a cat.
A dog can be a cat." Well, that's the same teacher that taught me 2 plus 2 is 4. That's right. Taught me H2O. That's right. So I guess this is right also. And then they're so indoctrinated with that, by the time it's challenged at home, the decision is always made by that child. And the fact that we don't have to tell your parents. You think you're a girl? We don't have to tell your parents this. This will be between us. They don't understand. So let's just keep it here at the school, to where we are today, where now we are debating whether biological boys can compete against girls.
As an athlete, I'm super thankful for the voices, and I'll say it this way, the female voices that are coming out right now that are standing up in that conversation, where they're saying, no, I don't want to compete against males. I have a makeup. I've worked hard. I'm not going to let a male come in. And I'm talking professional athletes here. One of my videos that I like to go to on this is actually, this conversation was actually had with Serena Williams before all of this conversation got popular. And so a popular tennis player was asked about Serena, and he said first, hey, she wouldn't even rank in the top 100 or top 60 of professional athletes because the game is different. They then asked her about it to cause some kind of diversity or some division. And she said, no, they're right. That's a different speed and a different power. I may be at the top of my game here, but I wouldn't even be in the ballpark around there. There's something about men and women. We're different. We're not less than. We're just different.
We're different. And I think that's the point. So the left wants to tell us, well, that means that you think one's superior than the other. No, they are different from each other. And thus, in what they do, they excel. And we know that back and forth. So that's, again, this class envy. That's this gender envy, quote unquote, that we are all the same. Who are you to tell? Well, we're not all the same.
We're not.
There is a difference. And thank God for the difference. Here's where the tragedy takes place. and again, targeted towards young people. And I want to bring this study up because I mentioned it in the teaching. And that is where they talk about the science of gender affirming care. And you're going to hear that in laws now, that if you as a parent are not gender affirming to your child, so my 8-year-old, because they learned the dog can be a cat, comes home and says, well, maybe I'm a cat. And that's happening too. Time to get into that. Maybe I'm a girl. And so I think I'm a girl. I don't want to be called Jim anymore. I want to be called Jane. And mom and dad says, you're not Jane, you're Jim. We're not going to call you that. And I go back and I tell the school, they won't call me by my who I am. They're not gender affirming. That is now being listed as child abuse. That you're abusing your child because you're not allowing your child to that. They're taking the role of the parent away to the point now that some jurisdictions are saying that we could remove that child. We'll send child services out to investigate because there's probably something else there. And so that's the challenge. Now here's the study I want to give before our time goes up. So they say, well, that's the science, and these kids, if you don't allow them to change their gender, then you're inflicting harm upon them to the point that, they could even commit suicide. And I've heard parents say that they've told us, about my son, would you rather have a live daughter than a dead son? Well, how cruel to make something like that. But the science and the studies are not there to prove that. Here's what the studies are showing. They just completed a 15-year study, because this, again, just goes back. They followed 2,700 children for 15 years. Wow. So at the beginning of that, they asked them, do they have any questions about their gender? Now, this is not saying, I think I'm a girl. This is just like, I've got some questions. What 10-year-old does not have questions, especially when adults are putting those questions to them? So there's some questions. I'm not ready to cross. But there are some questions. So 1 in 10 at that age said, age 11. At age 11 said, yeah, I've got some questions. 1 in 10. Well, today's society says, well, then we need to help that 1 in 10. We need to affirm that to that child. We need to help them transition. We need to give them puberty blockers. We need to, even to the point that we can help them transition surgically. Chloe Cole, which we met, had that happen to her. And so we need to help that along the line, because that's the science. What about these 2,700 children? 1 in 10. By the time they reached 25, it was 1 in 25 that had a question. Not that they wanted, they just had 1 in 25. So what does that prove? Bottom line, that what is happening among these young kids is not science, it's a fad. It's being introduced to them, indoctrinated to them. Society, music, movies is then reinforcing that. It's the fad of the day. So, hey, I want to get on board with that. But yet this is a fad that can bring total destruction. The science is not there. People are waking up to this. Parents are getting involved. Students are getting involved. You're hearing more and more of students that are walking out of school because they're saying, we're not going to allow the opposite sex in our restrooms or in our locker rooms. Thank God for some kids that are standing up to it. And parents need to join with that and stop this insanity. It is the spirit of Ishtar that is bringing this confusion into our society.
What's crazy is when you listen to all of this and then you know somewhat of the Bible, you can see, wow, Christianity was not just this easy. Following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not just this easy thing. Yes, God's load is easy, but it wasn't just this, culturally normal thing to do. You see it in the New Testament. The rise of the church happened in the midst of cultural unrest, cultural confusion, a lot like today. And yet God asks us to be countercultural. Asks us to not fall in line with the ways of the world around us, whether you're looking at the nation of Israel, and he said, I'm going to set you in the middle of the ites, but I'm going to ask you to not be and submit to these. That's where then you understand that the commandments were a basis of living that was so opposite of what was around them. And then you look at the New Testament, And so how then, that brings us back to this question. So then, like, how are we, what are you asking of us as we leave this today? How do we follow this in the world that we're living in now? Or is that all over? Are we all just throw hell in a handbasket?
No,
what do we do?
And I don't want that to be the feeling that people have when listening to this. Well, then they've taken over. Well, they were in control when Christianity came on the scene. Christianity, the power of the gospel, is, again, it is not just enticing words of man's wisdom. It's a demonstration of power. The gospel is not just a mantra that we live by. It's not just a doctrine. It's not just a code of ethics. There is spiritual power that is contained within the gospel, within the lives of the believer. That's what transformed society. That's what turned it around. It wasn't that suddenly they found a better code to live by. It was the spiritual authority behind that code. And that's where we can transform society. Yeah. And that's why our founding fathers, I think they were spiritually in tune enough to say that if we're going to let's base this thing on the standards of God's word, that all men are created equal. Let's look to a code of ethics. Let's look to a division of government where there's checks and balances, the three branches of government, where they looked at that. That's what this nation was based upon. Any society who has done that has flourished. When they abandon that, chaos comes in. Yeah. The return of the gods, they come right back in, and again, bringing chaos, bringing the immorality, the dominance of that spirit. And so we can fight that. Back to your question, then I'm through. We fight that with the truth. Ishtar wants to confuse that there is no truth. There are no standards. There is no male or female. There's no right or wrong. It's just whatever you think. No, there is. And if we got to return back that, hold true to that in the spirit of love, because that will be the salvation of society.
Man, I can't wait to continue this conversation. We're going to continue on this next week.
Next week, I'm going to show you some specific examples of, again, how these gods have returned, and the same type of worship then, even to the days that you can't, this is not coincidence. This is the arrogance of these demonic spirits that now have once again returned and resurfaced. It will be eye-opening in our next session.